Wow, that was so interesting. IES, yeah, definitely IES is a Spock organisation. I've realised why I don't fit in there. Wow, it's brilliant to have so many of you still here at whatever, 4:30. It just shows the interest in the area, doesn't it? And for those of you who did your CIPD when I did it, do you remember, you got a tatty old copy of Armstrong's Handbook of Reward Management somewhere? Armstrong and Merlis, yep. Well, that's the new one with Duncan Brown out 2 weeks ago. And chapter, there you go, chapter 10, after kind of base pay and whatever, financial well-being, okay? I think the last one was done about 4 or 5 years ago, but isn't it interesting? That's the first time financial well-being has been in there. So it's kind of, it is quite a kind of novel concept in pay and reward. And that, I think, explains some of what I'm going to talk about, which is kind of why do lots of, you're the converted. In a way, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to those who aren't converted and who don't get this. And that's where I need your help. And what I'm going to talk about is this first thing here. And I'll make sure I get us away on time, because I've got, as usual, lots of links to research that you can read and summaries. But it was the Money Advisory Service kindly gave us quite a lot of money to do some of what we were just talking about, do some research, do some proper independent research. And the interesting bit, so you're going to big employers saying, here you are, have us for free to work with you over a year to do research, this was the hardest area I've ever found in my career to get research into an organisation. Harder than exec pay, any other sensitive area. And I think that's quite telling about this area. There's something about it that maybe not HR functions, but boards find risky. Now, for those of you who don't know me or IES, we're a kind of, we're very much a Spock organisation. We're a charity. So the aim is to do research on good practice in employment and HR, get that into government policy and get that into employers. That's what we do. And interesting, this area, it was kind of, we had two streams of work. We had a kind of health, we've got kind of ageing medic specialists and that, and they were working with the HSE on the mental ill health stress standards. And then you got folk like me who do the traditional pay and reward stuff. So we kind of came together. We did a study actually quite early on, 2007-8, for PowerGen. What are they morphed into? I can't remember, but they're not around, are they, in that form now? But we did some work in there, and they were basically finding that their employee assistance line was becoming a debt counselling line. And for those of you who don't know power companies, you know, they're pretty good payers. The pay's good, the package is good, and yet they were finding from their ERP line they were getting a lot of queries on debt. And that's what we kind of investigated. And then we've been doing work for the EAP Line Association about showing an ROI on the use of their services. But we then got into the two streams I'm going to talk about, which was first CIPD funded some research with employers, really about who's doing what, which Close Brothers contributed to, and then secondly, the Money Advisory Services. We actually went in to organisations for a year and watched what they were doing on this. Now, we've heard all the stuff all day. This stuff is so obvious, and it's the scariest statistics on anything I look at in HR about just the scale of debt. In fact, I was just at what was still, although it's all their stuff was still Money Advisory Service, even though they're now in the new single financial guidance body. Don't worry, you get a copy of all these. But, you know, the stats are the scary. The one that really scared me was, so they kind of classify us into struggling, squeezed, and struggling, obviously, the kind of low pay. That's where universal credit and stuff is really hitting. Remember, the majority of kids in poverty now are actually in families with someone in work, not unemployed. But even if you came up into the middle income categories, sort of 30 to 50K, which I think, what are they, cushioned, that's what they call it, cushioned, it's about 20% of people are using debt for day-to-day expenses, food, utilities, etc. And it's much higher than that below. There's some interesting gender differences as well they were highlighting. Women are actually more likely to be in debt than men. They're more likely to use expensive ways of addressing the debt, but they're also much more likely than men to ask for help. Men really don't like asking for help in this, which of course is one of the big problems. Yeah, so we know this has been a growing issue, and we're back, I'm afraid, at 2008 levels in terms of financial debt levels, personal debt. So it is not a good situation. A lot of your employees, a lot of UK workforce is in debt and needs help. The initial work we did with CIPD, a survey largely of HR folks, you know, and followed up with some work that Close Brothers funded with employee surveys, basically highlighted, and most of these studies come up with similar findings, that an increasing numbers in your workforce are worrying about this and feel that it's affecting their performance at work, which is one of the reasons, I guess, that you guys got interested, sold it to your board, got initiatives going. I guess, so one of the questions we were looking at is, well, why doesn't everybody, why aren't all HR functions and employers doing that? Because we also know it's a perfect storm, isn't it? It's getting worse. We've got the ageing workforce. It's much more complex nowadays, post-Osborne, than it was to plan even your pension. You need advice on that, and yet we know it's only a minority of people coming up to retirement who actually go to pension-wise, and that's free, never mind actually paying for it. So they definitely need to get the behavioural psychologists in there to think, well, how can we get folks to go for advice? And we also know quite a lot about why people feel stressed. It's a lot of hassle to address it. They've got lower bandwidth. They're feeling that when they're getting these complex decisions on what to do with their finances and how to deal with debt, they're not able to do it, and they make bad decisions. There's a lot of resource around already to help. And I guess what we took was the Money Advisory Service's own model. So this is for their strategy. They're trying to improve money management capability in the whole of the UK. And basically what they're saying is we need to build people's capability based on their ability, so that people know what compound interest is, can calculate it, can see the difference between borrowing at low interest and borrowing at high interest. They've got the mindset, they're going to put the effort into it. You know, isn't it? It's like flex programs. I don't want to make the bloody decision, but I want you guys to do it for me because you're the experts. We've got to get away from that attitude. We've got to get away from attitudes of keeping up with the neighbours and you know, buying the next car that's as good as what's on my neighbour's drive. But it also needs to be accessible. And having worked for provider organisations for a lot of my career, we haven't always done the best job of that, of making it accessible to the man in the street. So, you know, when we build those capabilities, we know people are much more likely to not get into difficult situations. And if they do with their finances, they're much more likely either to address themselves or to seek help in doing so. So what's the role of employers? Well, we know that employee financial well-being does have an impact on mental ill health, and we can show direct links with productivity. And Annette, one of my old colleagues, Cox, she's pulled together a lot of the academic evidence on that. So if you need any of that, there's a lot of it about. And we also pretty much know that, you know, we can debate the effect of different actions that you're doing to boost financial capability, but broadly we know that almost whatever you do has a positive impact, and the more things you do, the better. The multiple initiative approach seems to work best. And just things, if we can get people to track their spending, guess what? They will change their behaviour and address the issue simply by getting them to track spending. And employers have obviously got a key role to play, and I think some of these areas have been touched on today. Obviously, the pay and benefits we provide which I find both a kind of reason to get involved in this area, and yet at board level sometimes that's a reason given for not getting involved. We can help people to make the most of that package by giving them choice and discounts. Obviously we've got the networks to be able to give them financial support, share information, maybe get to an IFA, although it's interesting that provision at the moment in the UK is more common for those income categories who you could argue would need it least, who are the high earners. That's where it's most typically provided still. It is your responsibility as employers. The regulators are quite clear about that. They're quite clear about what the difference between financial advice and financial guidance is, and you have a responsibility. They're very clear about that. And, you know, as members of society, we are, many of us in organisations where employees have got into and may still be in financial difficulty, and so we have a responsibility to them. And yet, despite that, and again, depending on the surveys, whichever you use, but it's between 10 and 20% of employers do anything on this, okay, which is pretty sad. So you are very much in the minority, okay? As I said, what we did with CIPD based on the survey was develop an employer model. It's a very simple model. Plan, do, review, improve. No. Assessment, what have you got at the moment? What is the financial capability of your workforce? Get engaged, get your senior teams, get stakeholders and champions to act on this. This is all in the research, which is, there are 300 bits of research, okay, on the Money Advisory Service. It was a £10 million project. It's all up there, and we've summarised it on all, so it's all freely available. Build support in the organisation, take action, and then review it. Very simple. The steps underneath are broken down, so you can look at those. So basically what we did was take the MAS's money, go to employers and say, we'd like to come in and do some research and test that model out. Survey your workforce, do some stuff, or more likely what you already had in plan anyway, and then survey them again after 12 months and see if it's had an effect. Sounds easy, doesn't it? And we found HR departments, great. Duncan Brown coming in for free, great. But boards, much less so. Much less so. And as I said, I found this the most difficult work to get case studies going on in my career. And in the end, we had 3 very well-known employers where HR, we discussed it, we got all the arguments, we went to the board, and it got rejected. We ended up with 3 employers, and one of those dropped out after 3 months for a couple of reasons, but one of them, I think, was they were worried about the findings from the initial survey. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? Interesting in what you think about that. We progressed it in 2 employers, and we did the survey. It's a standard survey. Again, you can see it's about 40 questions. So again, you can take that, Legal & General, they've taken it and run it themselves, so take it for free, that's what it's there for. Then in Employer 1, largely around communication, they didn't do anything radical, it was largely around better communication of their existing package, ran roadshows, linked in with the Money Advisory Service's own financial advice, guidance stuff on their website, and better information on their package, flexible benefits package. Employer 2, even more narrowly focused, very much on pensions. And then we went in again at the end of the year and resurveyed folk and interviewed folk about what the difference was. And you know, some of the concerns at board level, it's it's not our role. You know, these kids, if they're coming out of school, why aren't the schools teaching them? Which you might say, well, why aren't you getting in the schools to help that? Financial advice, still a big fear. We can't be seen to give financial advice. It's personal choice. And I guess the good pay and benefits package, that one was very regularly quoted. And as I said, there are plenty of people on 50K in financial trouble at the moment. So it's interesting. I I'll just come to what we actually found. We found, given those general stats and the scary stats that I gave at the start, didn't really work. We had to get evidence internally in terms of what is the case for acting on this, which is interesting given that one of the case studies was scared off at how bad it was. But I guess generally this worked pretty well. In the first employer, we found the understanding of the existing package was awful and much worse than they thought. Employer 2, the case was much more around growth. They were planning to grow quite significantly, and this gave them concerns that in terms of how these people were going to manage their money, that was really the driver. A senior champion, interestingly, in both the case studies that ran over the year, it was not in HR. Okay, the senior champion was not in HR. HR were very supportive. We did a lot of work with HR, but the champion was not an HR person. What we found from the survey, really in both cases, was about a fifth of employees felt their financial situation was out of control. They were worried about lack of saving and debts. Again, this is using the Money Advisory Service framework. 3/4 worried about life events, kids, their kids' weddings, whatever it is that would hit their income. Debt, 40% virtually in employer 2 were worried about debt. In both cases, quite a strong view that the employer should be giving support. Research actually goes both ways. In some cases, employees say they don't want employer support, they don't trust them. In other cases, they do. In these 2 case studies, it was very much the latter. They were looking to you for information and support. At the end of the year, what we found was through the initiatives that HR had taken, we had significant increases in awareness and understanding from what you guys would probably regard as relatively straightforward initiatives. There was nothing super sexy or radical. It was pretty standard communication, mix of channels, get the information across, bring the advisors in, those sorts of communication that you'll all be doing, I'm sure. It generated more. And so HR, which had some additional plans, found it suddenly had tons of support for those additional plans. We did a lot of follow-up interviewing and focus groups and got a lot of evidence in terms of why people felt this was really beneficial. Like me, you've got that pile of stuff that you say you're going to look at and you never do. Actually going to one of the roadshows, seeing an IFA really made us look at this and address the financial situation. Both employers, therefore, have really extended the scope of their activity. They got the data they needed to do that. But they recognise, you don't address this overnight. If kids are coming out of school without the sort of knowledge of budgeting or whatever, then you're not going to change that overnight. So really, to sum up, you can, as I say, download the model. I've put all the links in. But really, this is about doing some decent research to get that evidence. As I said, the national stats, although they're scary, don't seem to make the case well enough or not well enough to drive action. Audit your existing activity. Both employers initially said, we don't do anything. Then you found they do pre-retirement workshops. They were doing apprentice training, which included a bit on budgeting and sort of financial well-being. So, quite often you find there's a base you can build off, that there is stuff around the organisation, as well as looking at what other employers, and that's been great today, hasn't it, with all the case studies. Because most of the research here is as well, it's got to be tailored. Okay, the same approach will work really well in one setting, not so well in another. Make a plan and get support for it. And the critical stage where this has been breaking down, it seems, in most employers, is at the senior level. I don't know why. Have they not got kids in their 20s who've got no dosh? I don't know what it is, but certainly we struggle to get it across. And I'd love to get some of your experiences than that. Get it in with other work streams. You may have work going on diversity, on mental ill health, etc., which relates to this. Get that together, build a coordination across that in the organisation, and do that baseline survey. Where are we at the moment? And then the action. And I think our thing was really, simple and extend. And I've heard some sophisticated stuff today. I've heard some simple stuff. It doesn't really matter where you start. It doesn't seem to. But get on that journey. And finally evaluate. We're really bad at getting the evidence. It's really worth resurveying. We built far better evidence for bigger investment from that second survey than we did for the initial one. So really following that plan, I think is the key. Sounds like you're doing it. Let's get out there and get other employers to follow suit. Thanks very much.